Hello, my dear ones. Welcome to my drama recap channel. Today's episode is unmissable. So, subscribe to the channel now to keep up with the recaps I've been posting every 2 days. If we reach 1,000 subscribers, I'll start posting videos daily. Enjoy today's episode, and don't forget to give it a like. The story begins with a young woman named Lynn, who arrives at her father's company with her bodyguard for an important board meeting. Lynn is eager to attend the meeting but receives a message from Chi-san warning her that the situation is dangerous. Despite knowing the risks, Lynn insists on going in. When they reach the entrance, the security guards refuse to let her through. Before entering, Lynn gives in her bodyguard a necklace and tells him to use it if he needs help. In the meeting room, one of the board members treats her rudely. It is soon revealed that Sean is actually Lynn's fiancé. The board members try to take over the company, believing that Lynn, being blind, is incapable of running it after her father's death. However, Lynn remains firm and refuses to give in to their demands, leading to an intense confrontation. Fortunately, Lynn has the necklace she gave to Lynn. When she uses it, the guards try to detain her. Due to her blindness, Lynn struggles during the fight, but after brief resistance, she manages to escape within to a safe place. While in hiding, Lynn suddenly remembers something crucial. She realizes that the person responsible for her father's death may be among the board members. Later that night, Lynn wakes up to find In by her side, tending to her, albeit not very gently. Convinced that In is a bad person, Lynn decides to fire him. However, In refuses to leave, insisting that Lynn's father had assigned him as her bodyguard. Determined to confirm her suspicions, Lynn tries to recall some evidence. She remembers that during a tense moment in the past, In kissed her, and she reacted by hurting him. Despite In's objections, Lynn keeps insisting until he reluctantly agrees to stay by her side but still refuses to admit anything. Frustrated, Lynn decides to leave him. Shortly after, Lynn meets Chi-san and her best friend, Jubi, and asks Chi-san to call the police to share what she remembers about the day her father died. However, Chi-san and Jubi hesitate, pointing out that there is no solid evidence to support her claims. Nonetheless, Lynn remains convinced that In is her father's killer. She also reveals that her blindness was caused by a blow to the forehead. Meanwhile, In enters a room and starts searching for something. Lynn, still trying to recall evidence, also enters the room, searching for a CCTV camera. When Lynn is in danger, In rushes to help her, revealing his presence once again. Lynn accuses him once more of being the killer and even attempts to strangle him. Surprisingly, In shows no fear. Shortly after, Chi-san and Jubi arrive and manage to calm Lynn down. However, when Lynn asks for help retrieving a CCTV camera from a shelf, Chi-san and Jubi seem frightened. In the end, it is In who helps Lynn with the task. Then, Lynn asks Chi-san and Yubei to check the CCTV footage. Shortly after, Yubei rushes to review it and brings back the recording, showing that In was not in the room. Thus, the accusations against him lack evidence to support them. Later, In meets his friend Joe, whom he had kept tied up in his house for a day. Despite this, their relationship seems intact. In was not responsible for Lynn's father's death. He was, in fact, trying to find hidden data that Lynn's father and his company needed to achieve justice. Moreover, In wanted to improve his relationship with Lynn so that she would help him find the information he was looking for. The next morning, Lynn woke up to a pleasant surprise. In was there, holding a rose and a cup of coffee, acting friendlier than before. Despite his gestures, Lynn still believed he was a bad person and rejected him. Shortly after, In took Lynn out for breakfast. Jubi started showing interest in Lynn, but she felt something was off with him. It turns out that Yubei was following orders to get In and Lynn out of the house so that his plan could be executed. He finally managed to make them leave. When it was time to go, Lynn acted as if she didn't need In's help. However, when she tried to get into the car, she struggled, and In had to assist her. On the way, Lynn asked In to stop, deciding they should walk to meet Mrs. Wong at her house. He agreed and took good care of her during the visit, unaware that Lynn was merely testing him to see if he would do anything wrong. But In did nothing wrong. Nevertheless, he insisted that something was off and decided to investigate. In discovered that some dangerous individuals were planning to harm him and Lynn. Fortunately, he arrived just in time to save Lynn, who had fainted in fear. Despite his own injuries, In rushed to take her home. When they returned, Chi-san and Yubei seemed very worried, but in reality, they had ill intentions toward Lynn. It was revealed that Yubei already had a relationship with Chi-san. The next day, Lynn woke up looking weary and felt a wave of gratitude, thanking In for saving her, which surprised him. However, In didn't feel happy because Lynn still thought he was her father's killer. Later, Lynn sat alone, holding the necklace she had given to In, recalling all the times he had helped her. This made her start to wonder if he was truly responsible for her father's death. Meanwhile, In was surprised when Joe showed up, bringing information about a serious accident. Years ago, In had saved Lynn from a similar accident, and now he had gotten hurt again while rescuing her. After that, he took Lynn out to eat, but she was still not convinced to accept his help. In the end, she agreed to let him assist her during the meal. He quietly helped her find the utensils she needed, always paying attention to what she wanted. During their conversation, Lynn's father's funeral came up unexpectedly. In suggested organizing a general funeral to honor him, and Lynn quickly agreed. However, Chi-san did not like In's suggestion. Later that night, Lynn sat in front of her father's photo, crying because she missed him so much. In seeing her emotions, observed her sadness from a distance. He cared deeply for Lynn and, while trying to comfort her, shared that he had also lost his own father. This made her understand that he truly empathized with the importance of a funeral. When Lynn asked how his father had died, he remembered the event, but decided not to share the details with her. Lynn felt grateful for his help in planning the funeral, but her sadness lingered, which made In pity her. He also began to suspect Chisen's actions, as Chi-san seemed to know something about Lynn's father's death. Shortly after, Lynn told In that someone had left a USB drive with a note saying that Jome was not really Jome. This made Lynn curious about the USB and the message. She asked Yubei to check the data on the drive and discovered that Jome had been pretending to be Joe, acting as Lynn's bodyguard the entire time. However, neither Lynn nor Yubei had known this until then. That night, Lynn couldn't stop thinking about the message regarding Jome. While reflecting, she invited In to have a drink with her. He initially refused, but eventually agreed. After drinking, In became drunk and unconscious. It was then that Lynn decided she needed to uncover the truth about In's real identity. Believing he was just Joe, her bodyguard, Lynn tried to investigate him. However, In realized what she was attempting and stopped her. He did not let Lynn leave, and at that moment, she finally voiced her doubts about his true identity. In did not deny it and admitted that he was not who she thought he was. Lynn then accused him of being her father's killer for pretending to be her bodyguard. In defended himself, insisting he was not the culprit. Later, he left Lynn alone with Joe, revealing his true identity. Joe explained that he no longer wanted to keep getting hurt by staying close to Lynn. However, In refused to give up and was determined to seek justice for Lynn's father's death. The next day, Lynn asked the maid in her house where she could find out the truth about the people around her. Without hesitation, she agreed to go within. Thus, Lynn visited Mrs. Wong. This time, Lynn asked why In had taken her to see Mrs. Wong. He explained that he wanted to clear his name from the accusations since Lin believed he was her father's killer. After hearing the truth, Lin apologized to him for wrongly accusing him. At that moment, he realized that Yubei and Chi-san had lied to her. Later that night, Lin surprised him while he was changing clothes. Although she remained calm, her limited vision prevented her from seeing clearly what was happening. Shortly after, he invited her out for a drink, but initially declined. Lin insisted, and during the conversation, she shared her doubts about Chisen's presence on the day of her father's death. However, Lin did not believe Chi-san was the killer because he had always helped her in times of danger, unaware that his help might have had ulterior motives. The next day, Lin went to find Yubei in his room, but instead found Chi-san. She had difficulty recognizing him due to her impaired vision. Lin asked about the CCTV footage from her father's room, but Yubei lied, claiming the recordings had been erased. Later, while walking alone, Lin almost tripped as she suddenly realized that Yubei had deceived her. Fortunately, he was there to catch her. At that moment, Lin asked for his help in uncovering the truth about Yubei. He then invited Lin to dinner, and Joe was also present. Lin was curious about Joe and wanted to get an idea of his appearance, even though she couldn't see him clearly. However, In prevented her from doing so during the dinner. Joe finally agreed to help Lin gather information about Yubei. After the meal, In took Lin back home, where Chi-san was waiting for her. To Lin's surprise, Chi-san was very rude to her. He implied that Lin had betrayed his trust by defending In. In response, Lin reminded Chi-san that he was her bodyguard and should always be by her side. Later, Chi-san was invited for conversation, and the atmosphere grew very tense. He openly accused In of trying to take advantage of Lin's family wealth, even though that wasn't his intention. Chisen's attitude, however, clearly indicated that he had sinister plans for Lin's family. Despite this, In warned Chi-san not to harm Lin in any way. Afterward, Lin was asked to sign documents related to discussions her father had started. This occurred after Lin's father learned about Padre Dine's death, a time when Joe had already gathered almost all the necessary evidence to seek justice for In's father and his company. This led Joe to stop being Lin's bodyguard to confront his own family. However, he hesitated to do so, which made Lin suspect that he might have feelings for her, given his constant efforts to protect her. In was speechless at this accusation. Later, he visited Lin in her room. To his surprise, she knew he was there, even without hearing his voice. Lin admitted that she felt calm when he was around, something she couldn't fully explain. Leaving confused about his own feelings because he didn't want to hurt her, the next day the phone rang. It was Joe calling about Yubei, and they agreed to discuss the matter together. However, Joe had a hidden agenda. He arranged for two men to wait for Lin. But Yubei discovered this plan, recorded everything, and even instructed the two men to harm Lin. Meanwhile, In was furious because Lin wasn't home and suspected Joe was responsible. However, Joe had no bad intentions. He only wanted Lin to fire In as her bodyguard. Without hesitation, In rushed to rescue Lin. Fortunately, he found her just in time. Lin realized that Yubei was behind the dangerous situation and, scared, she hugged In tightly. He promised not to leave her alone. On the other hand, Joe managed to capture Yubei for his crimes and gave him a stern warning. However, In arrived just in time to stop Joe from going too far, as he still had a sense of right and wrong. Despite this, In didn't hold back in reprimanding Yubei for everything he had done to Lin. At that moment, Lin entered Yubei's room. He acted as if nothing had happened, even though Lin was aware of his wrongdoings. When Lin confronted him, Yubei tried to change the subject. Shortly after, Chi-san joined them. He pulled Lin aside to share a secret. Not only did he reveal what he believed was a secret, but he also defended Yubei. He deceitfully played a voice recording suggesting that In only cared about Lin's money, hoping to turn her against him. However, the recording was edited and didn't show In's true feelings. Moreover, Chi-san accused In of being the cause of all of Lin's problems. Later, while taking a bath, Lin couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened, feeling very confused. While trying to dry herself, she slipped and hit her forehead. She screamed, and In quickly ran to see what had happened. He helped her rest, but Lin continued to express her doubts about him. Although he wanted to protect her, Lin firmly asked him to leave and stop being her bodyguard because he hadn't been honest with her. Feeling sad and disrespected, In left. After that, Lin's vision unexpectedly returned to normal. Determined, she left her room. To her surprise, she heard Yubei's voice coming from another room. Curious, Lin went to investigate and found Yubei and Chi-san kissing. Yubei was her best friend, and Chi-san was her fiancé. This discovery left Lin heartbroken. Yubei thought Lin was still blind, but Lin pretended not to have seen anything and acted as if nothing had happened. She quietly left the room, overwhelmed with sadness and unable to believe that her best friend and fiancé would betray her this way. She also recalled all of In's warnings and suspicions about them. Meanwhile, In was troubled because he was no longer Lin's bodyguard. Unexpectedly, he found himself at her house but wasn't sure if she could see him. He tried to hide his face, but Lin recognized him immediately and became very angry because he hadn't been honest with her from the beginning. Seeing Lin deeply disappointed, In wanted to explain why he hadn't been truthful, but Lin still saw him as a bad person. The argument escalated, and in a moment of frustration, he forcibly kissed her. This surprised Lin, and she responded with a slap, filled with disappointment and confusion. Discouraged, In walked away and turned to alcohol for comfort. Not even Joe's words could help him realize that he was only hurting himself. The next day, Lin pretended to still be blind when she met with Chi-san and Yubei to discuss her father's will with Mr. Wong, the family lawyer. The will stated that all of her father's assets would go to Lin. This news upset Chi-san, who wanted the wealth for himself. Lin acted relaxed to hide the fact that she had regained her sight, while Chi-san grew increasingly nervous. Later, Lin decided to leave the house, and Joe accompanied her. Unable to bear the misunderstandings between Lin and In, Joe confessed his true feelings for her. Joe truly cared for Lin and was surprised to learn that In had very strong feelings for her. Meanwhile, In received a call from Lin saying she wanted to see him. To his surprise, she was already at his house, holding a new contract. This time, In would become Lin's personal assistant, and she was starting to trust him more. Lin even acknowledged that she was aware of In's feelings for her. While they talked, In's suspicions about Chi-san grew stronger, especially because of his connection to Lin's father's death. However, they still lacked solid evidence. Shortly after, they returned to Lin's house, surprising Chi-san and Yubei, who intensely hated In's presence. They tried to convince Lin to get rid of him, but she categorically refused. Lin also asked Chi-san and Yubei to organize a birthday party for her, which would take place a few days later. On the day of the party, Lin looked elegant and beautiful. At first, the atmosphere seemed pleasant, but it quickly became tense when Lin mentioned the engagement ring she was wearing, even though it belonged to her. This caused Lin's friends to distance themselves and reject Yubei's presence. After the birthday party, In seemed upset with Lin's actions, thinking she wanted to get back together with Chi-san. However, Lin's true goal was to shame Yubei for her behavior and expose that Chi-san was untrustworthy. She might still get hurt, but Lin bravely reminded In that she was now his assistant, even though he sincerely wanted to protect her. Shortly afterward, Yubei entered the room and knelt before Lin, begging for forgiveness. Later, Lin met with Chi-san and expressed her frustration that he hadn't supported her when she was humiliated by Lin. Chi-san believed that In was behind everything, knowing his bad intentions, and decided to act against him. Later, Yubei and Lin went to see the doctor. On their way home, they suddenly encountered a group of people who wanted to attack them. In faced the threat while Lin and Yubei tried to escape. When they returned, Chi-san greeted them, showing concern for Lin, which made Yubei jealous. However, Lin didn't appreciate Chisen's attention. In her room, Lin was genuinely worried about In's condition. Shortly afterward, he arrived, and Lin immediately hugged him tightly, afraid something bad might happen to him. This surprised In, and he wanted to help her, but Lin remained evasive. The next day, In took Lin to pick up her medicine. During their conversation, he suggested that the thugs who attacked them were after him, not Lin. This made Lin even more worried, but he managed to calm her down. While in a room, Lin started searching for something and found an insurance contract. To her surprise, it was for her, with a large sum of money. At that moment, Chi-san and Yubei entered. Lin quickly hid and realized they were plotting something evil, trying to exploit her blindness to steal her wealth. Chi-san almost found Lin in the room, but luckily, In appeared just in time and lured them away to protect her. Once everything was safe, Lin returned to her room, feeling very upset. In was initially angry at her for putting herself in danger, but after hearing about all the bad things Chi-san and Yubei had done, he felt sorry for her. He promised Lin that he would always protect her so she would never be alone, giving her a comforting hug to calm her. Meanwhile, Yubei met with Chi-san and revealed a surprising secret. The largest shareholder in Lin's family company was actually In. Lin's father had recently transferred the shares to In, which shocked Chi-san. In response, he invited In to a meeting under the pretense of discussing the shares but didn't admit anything. Instead, In teased Chi-san, wanting to expose his evil plans and stop him. Chi-san realized this and became furious with In. Moreover, In suspected that Chi-san might have been involved in Lin's father's death. That night, Lin and Joe met in her room to watch the CCTV footage. They saw Chi-san entering Lin's room, apparently looking for something. They discovered that Chi-san was worried about being suspected of Lin's father's murder. To incriminate Chi-san, they needed solid evidence. Seeing how worried Lin was, In tried to comfort her. The next day, while Lin was looking for a room, Chi-san suddenly appeared. This time, he suspected Lin had regained her sight, even though she was still pretending to be blind. To Lin's surprise, Chi-san almost touched her eyes to check, but fortunately, she managed to keep her act, even though she was genuinely scared. Shortly after, In arrived quickly, taking Lin out of the room and sharing his concerns about the constant danger she faced. Without saying much, he kissed her, and this time, Lin didn't pull away. She accepted his affection and was deeply moved by his care. Afterward, she met Joe, who repeatedly warned her to stop what she was doing as it put her in danger. However, Lin didn't listen. She was determined to do things her way. One night, In woke up to the sound of his phone. The urgent news he received made him rush out as it concerned his mother. Upon learning of the situation, Lin insisted on accompanying him. After resolving everything, they returned home together. To Lin's surprise, In held her hand, and the two began sharing their troubles. Unexpectedly, Lin expressed her desire to protect him too, and this concern made him suddenly embrace her tightly. Later, an incident put them in danger. In told Lin to find a safe place while he confronted the attacker. Fortunately, the police arrived just in time, and Lin quickly ran to him. That night, Lin was deeply worried about him. In warned her not to investigate Chi-san further if something bad happened, as it would put her in danger. However, Lin disagreed. She just wanted him to be safe and stay by her side. Later, In helped Lin rest and gently kissed her forehead before leaving. Afterward, he met Chi-san to express his anger over what he had done. However, Chi-san didn't feel guilty until Lin threatened him. Only then did Chi-san promise not to harm Lin. In return to Lin's room, where she warmly welcomed him. She had prepared a surprise for him because it was his birthday. At that moment, both felt very happy and dared to ask for a special gift. At first, Lin was shy, but eventually kissed him first. They spent a romantic night together. The next day, Lin continued to care for In, but he mentioned that he would leave her again. While she watched him change clothes, Lin noticed scars on his back. She discovered he had gotten injured helping her during the accident, but had never told her. To show his love, In took Lin on a trip where they enjoyed beautiful scenery together. He asked about her feelings, and Lin confirmed what she had already shown with the kiss on his birthday night. This made him very happy, and they kissed again. However, Lin felt something was wrong. During the trip, she hugged him tightly, not wanting him to leave. The next morning, Lin woke up to find a farewell letter along with the necklace he had given her. This made her feel empty. Seeing his wardrobe empty, she tried to contact him, but he had truly left. Meanwhile, Joe, who had a somewhat sarcastic friendship with In, remained worried about In's reckless behavior. Despite Joe's concerns, In continued putting himself in danger. Aware of Chisen's bad intentions, Lin even left a will with Joe in case something happened to her. Lin was deeply sad because he left her, but she treasured the necklace he gave her. It reminded her of how Mule had helped her after the accident years ago. Then, something unexpected happened. Lin met Joe and thought she had asked him to take care of her. She decided to stay close to Joe because she believed he would take her in. Meanwhile, she found herself in a difficult situation with all the injuries on her body. Soon after, Lin received a call from Joe, warning her that something bad might happen to her. Without wasting any time, he rushed to find her. When he arrived, he found Lin drunk and in a bad mood. Although he asked her to come back home, Lin refused to leave because she wanted to be with him in her drunken state. Lin seemed even more adorable, and her feelings for In were strong, despite her uncertainty about the future. Lin didn't seem to mind at all. She trusted him completely. However, when she tried to kiss him, In suddenly passed out from all his injuries. The next day, Lin had breakfast ready, and when In sent it to her, he hugged her tightly and gave her a sweet kiss. Both of them felt much happier. Then, he picked her up and Lin playfully teased him. Unexpectedly, Lin found a book containing information about her family. To her surprise, she discovered that she owned part of the shares in her father's company, which troubled her greatly. Although her understanding of the situation wasn't entirely correct, she chose not to tell him the whole truth because she didn't want him to get into trouble. Feeling greatly disappointed, Lin decided to leave. In tried to stay with her, but she was determined to leave. When she arrived home, Lin looked at a family photo and felt overwhelmed by all the secrets she had to face. Although she knew In cared about her, she was surprised when Yubei showed up. It turned out that Yubei had always known that Lin's sight had returned to normal, but she didn't feel guilty about it, which only made Lin feel more disappointed. Lin discovered that Yubei resented her because she always seemed to have a better life, while Yubei felt inferior. However, Lin had never belittled Yubei and had always considered her a friend. Then, Yubei shared some disturbing news, stating that Lin's father was responsible for the bankruptcy of Dine's company, which caused a lot of suffering to many people. This news left Lin deeply saddened. Later, Yubei told Chi-san that Lin had discovered their relationship, which surprised him. Meanwhile, Chi-san managed to stop his plan to harm Lin and went to see her. At first, Lin hesitated to accept Chisen's arrival but when he tried to be honest, she decided to give him a chance. He hugged her, which made her angry. At that moment, Chi-san did not admit his mistakes and, instead, blamed Yubei. Lin didn't believe Chisen's words and, boldly, accused him of being responsible for her father's death. This angered Chi-san, but he remained calm because he knew Lin didn't have solid evidence to prove his involvement in her father's death. In the next moment, Chi-san dared to express his concern for Lin. But fortunately, Lin arrived just in time to rescue her. To everyone's surprise, Lin had installed several CCTV cameras and deliberately provoked Chi-san, hoping to incriminate him. He quickly realized Lin's plan and became very upset. Lin felt guilty because her father's actions led to the death of Dine's father. Even though In had always been kind to her, she felt responsible for everything that had happened. In her anguish, Lin tried to run away, wanting to leave In behind, but he wouldn't allow it. He wanted Lin to know that she shouldn't bear the weight of her father's mistakes alone. He still loved her and wanted to protect her, but Lin struggled to accept her feelings. Therefore, he decided to stay by her side, even if she didn't want him there. Both In and Lin were in the same space, but they couldn't face each other, not even the next day. Although they were in the same house, they felt like strangers. After a few days, Lin woke up to find that In was no longer at home. Soon after, Lin received a phone call, which made her rush to find him. When she arrived, she encountered Joe, who was furious with her. He blamed Lin for repeatedly hurting herself, even though Lin's father had also been responsible for her father's death. Lin realized that Joe wasn't well, and her concern for him touched her heart. Lin sincerely expressed how much she cared about him, and they reconciled, sharing a moment of affection while Lin was still in Joe's arms. At that moment, a notification appeared on Lin's phone, interrupting their moment. Chi-san kept trying to convince her that In was responsible for her father's death, but Lin didn't believe him. She trusted In completely and already knew the truth, which angered Chi-san. He then threatened In's safety. Lin felt powerless in the face of Chisen's crimes, realizing that he had the power to hurt both of them. Meanwhile, In had a nightmare and woke up searching for Lin, who wasn't at home. When he found her, he hugged her tightly, fearing that she would leave him. This made Lin realize that his presence brought comfort to those around him. Lin then went to see Yubei and reprimanded her for all the mistakes she had made. With anger and sadness, Lin gave her the engagement ring that belonged to Chi-san because she knew that Yubei had always had feelings for him. The next day, Lin and Joe were following someone when, unexpectedly, they ran into Yubei. This time, Lin tried to get Yubei to speak, as she knew that Yubei was aware of Chisen's crimes. Yubei even had a copy of a CCTV recording showing Chi-san killing Lin's father, but she remained silent during the conversation. Lin asked Yubei to join her in stopping Chisen's crimes, but Yubei refused. She shared only a small fragment of information, revealing that Chi-san was extremely determined to destroy Lin's father's company and had finally succeeded. Meanwhile, at In's house, Lin and he were reviewing some files when Lin's phone rang. It was Chi-san, using her once again in a moment of desperation. Lin offered him all the shares she owned, but Chi-san refused. He insisted that Lin marry him to take control of her family's wealth. Concerned for In's safety, Lin reluctantly agreed to his demands. The next day, Chi-san confronted In, furious that In had managed to sink his company by preventing him from taking control of In's family business. Lin was determined to not lose, especially because she still had In under her control. This greatly upset In, as he couldn't bear the thought of Chi-san hurting Lin. Meanwhile, Yubei was reviewing CCTV footage of Chi-san killing Lin's father. The evidence left her speechless, but when she tried to send a message while holding the footage, Chi-san discovered it and entered Yubei's house. Their relationship became tense. Yubei was disappointed in Chi-san because it seemed that she no longer cared about him. He realized that Yubei had taken inside and suspected she had shared information about his company within. Feeling threatened, Chi-san confronted him, but couldn't hurt him. Lin and him were growing closer, despite the many challenges they faced. Lin was determined to put Chi-san behind bars. However, one morning, Lin woke up to find that In wasn't by her side. Instead, she found a letter from him promising to return and asking her not to go anywhere because he wanted to protect her. This revelation made Lin want to leave, but she found herself trapped. Soon after, worried about In's condition, Lin sought the help of the police. On the other hand, Chi-san had no plans of showing mercy. He intended to marry Lin and believed that even if he died, he would still win her love. He was not afraid and felt a wave of anger when he found out that Chi-san had incriminated his father's company. Despite everything that had happened, Chi-san was determined to take control of the company. Finally, In challenged Chi-san to a fight, agreeing that the winner would get whatever they wanted. Chi-san accepted, but sent his men to fight in his place. After a tough battle, suffering several injuries, In managed to defeat all of Chisen's men, though he was wounded in the process. In this desperate situation, Chi-sen still wanted to hurt In, but then Lin arrived at the scene. Lin's presence made everything even more tense. Chi-san threatened In, demanding that he kneel before him or harm Lin. Reluctantly, In did not comply with the demand. However, when Chi-san tried to kiss Lin, In couldn't accept it. Fueled by anger, he stood up and confronted Chi-san, leading to a fight. During the struggle, Chi-san accidentally stabbed himself with a knife. He then fainted due to severe blood loss from his own injuries. Seeing this, Lin became very concerned about In's condition and ran to try and stop the bleeding. She reassured him that he would be fine. Shortly afterward, In regained consciousness, easing Lin's fear of losing him. Some time later, Lin and In were together again, still with him serving as her bodyguard. Their relationship was now safe from any threat, allowing them to find true happiness together. If you liked this episode, don't forget to subscribe because as soon as I reach 1,000 subscribers, I'll be making episodes every day. I'm leaving 2 videos here for you to watch now. See you later, friends.